Sorry for the interruption. We're speaking to you, or I'm speaking to you today from Kenya, from Kisumu, the city named Kisumu, and from the Afro-Cities Conference. So many of us are here, and although some of us are traveling, we are all with you in spirit. What I would like to do is turn the agenda over to Heather and Heidi, and she will give us some background in the preparations for this session and introduce us to the program. So, thank you. Heather?
Thank you so much, Joseph. So as many of you know, everyone who joined last time and anyone who was unable to join us last time, this is both a live session and an asynchronous session. So we do have a Google Classroom component to the program. And we had a question posted last week for the participants to share their responses. The question was, we invite you to reflect on the following. Imagine moving through your territories. Is it the same for men, women, and children? So we did have a few responses to this. We have a response from Al-Maludi Al-Kabir, who says that what's dangerous about inequality is the continuation of eliminating the last strongholds of the values built by Indigenous peoples that bear justice and equality, whether between the sexes or in the division of wealth in order to live a decent life for all. And also points to a rule inspired by Islamic law that distinguishes between men and women in inheritance. So I'm not sure what the proverb is, but it translated here to the male is like the luck of two females, but meaning I think that men will take twice as much as women. What men have is equivalent to what two women will have. So this is a challenge faced by many in under Islamic law. We have another contribution from Herbert Chibvan Godse. So in his community, women sometimes have a disadvantage on issues including attacks and rape. Children are also affected, but also points out that political power is really the key to who has access to properties or who will lose their property, whether that be women or men. So highlighting something that maybe is more of an impact than gender issues. We have another contribution from Victor Kazembe Kawanga, who points out that for the majority of women, access to land and property, which is essential for food production and sustainable livelihoods, is dependent on natal and marital affiliations. So women can lose the right to land if there is a change in their marital status due to marriage, divorce, or death of a spouse. And states that to be effective, interventions should focus on women's right to access land, as well as on the cultural and social factors that prevent women from obtaining secure rights to that land. We have another contribution from Daisy Oropeza, and who points not only to women, but is quite clear that both women and youth face some vulnerabilities. And that in particular, peasant Indigenous women who live in collectively owned territories face problems when they divorce or separate from their husbands. So this contribution from Daisy, I believe, is from Latin America. And the previous contribution that also mentioned this was from somewhere in Africa. I'm not sure the countries here. But so we can see that globally, this is an issue for women who depend upon their relationship to men in order to secure their land rights. So that's a big issue in vulnerability. So now I think we have 5 minutes that I think it would be nice to have, if we have any short contributions from the floor, or anyone who I didn't have a chance to read their contribution. Maybe we can take a comment from the floor, or if anyone wants to elaborate on what they wrote in the chat, just before we move on to our first speaker. Or if any of our facilitators would like to share something.
Hello.
Hi, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Ephraim from Zimbabwe. I need to share what is also happening in the Zimbabwe. I can say in Zimbabwe, most Zimbabwean society, there are very strong patriarchal systems where women are continuously regarded as minors and are only allowed to learn through their male relatives. Traditional wives and daughters have no land rights, but can only access these rights through their male relatives. To an extent that women are not even applying, or are not even encouraged to apply for land. As compared to men, women have weaker property rights and tenure security, and there is still no defined mechanism from the government that is structured to ensure that women acquire secure tenure. And also after the pre-colonial period, which we are in, the land reform strategies in Zimbabwe have incorporated the process of exclusion, worsening social division and class disparities to an extent that women are still even marginalized. We can say that the new government just duplicate what the colonizers did, but now it's it's the government, the male, taking advantage of women. And also I can say that with the new dispensation, the new government recently, we have seen a looming of displacements where indigenous people are being targeted, to being evicted away from their traditional lands to pave way for development. For example, the people in the Chirezi, the eastern part of Zimbabwe, the indigenous Yangani people are being moved away from their ancestral land to a place where the government is not even telling them where exactly, and where there are no basic amenities. So we have seen that a shift where the government is giving a priority to foreign investors than the local people. Their local people are not benefiting from the investors who come to invest in our land. And we have seen that major projects, we can see the Chisumbanje ethanol project. Here I am in Masvingo province. We have seen the Chingwisi dam the local people are not even benefiting after this development. The local people are being displaced to faraway places, and people from other parts of Zimbabwe are the ones who come to benefit, to the extent that the local people cannot see that development. So that's what I can say for now.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful intervention, and I think hit on a lot of the common themes that we also saw in the responses. So the impact on Indigenous people and values at the hands of colonizers, and also the impact of the development sector. We saw mining was also mentioned in the written comments. We are going to move on now to our first speaker. However, I just want to let you all know that we do have a couple more spaces that we will ask for your participation. So please, if you have your hand raised or if you want to make a contribution, there will be time for you to speak during this session. So please hold on to what you'd like to share with the group. So I'll move on now to one of our facilitators, Hilary Yizu, who's from Zimbabwe as well, and he will introduce our first global speaker.
Thank you so much, Heather, and good day to everyone, and a warm welcome from Zimbabwe. I'm Hilary Jo, one of the co-facilitators of the land rights movement, and thank you so much also to my colleague Ephraim from Masvingo in Zimbabwe. They are also working on land rights issues, and I also noted that from all the comments there was one key issue which kept on coming back: how women and children are being affected. Hence the need for the human right to land, as Joseph was saying. So I would just like to take this opportunity to introduce one of our speakers, and also a colleague from South Africa, Ms. Lorraine Royston, Director of Research and Advocacy at Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa, SERI. Prior to joining SERI, Laura Royston was a principal at Development Works, a development practice based in Johannesburg, where she undertook a wide range of consulting projects involving research, advocacy, writing, policy advisory, and implementation in a variety of provincial levels, national levels, government levels, NGO fields, and also has expertise in development planning and urban tenure. She focuses her work on research and advocacy in the securing a home theme. Lauren has over 25 years of work experience in the housing, urban land, tenure, and planning fields. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Studies and English Literature, a Master of Science in Development Planning, and a Master of Arts in Creative Writing, all from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Lorraine, the floor is yours, and you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you, Hilary, for the introduction. I need to start off briefly by saying that we currently have no electricity here in Johannesburg, so I'm not able to provide any more light. I don't know if I'm sufficiently visible. However, I won't run out of power on my laptop, but that's just a brief, just to let you know the situation I'm in at the moment. I was a little bit flustered at the start of this because I had to set up without power, but here I am, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation. At the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, which is based in Johannesburg in South Africa, we focus on socio-economic rights in a number of different dimensions, and it's the housing and land rights aspect of socio-economic rights that I bring to this input today. So without any further introductory comments, could I say that whilst I don't have a presentation, I'm going to be using the briefing note that I prepared, which I understand everyone has access to. So if it's okay with you, Hilary, what I'll do is turn off my video because I'm just going to look at my screen. I haven't been able to print it because of the power problem, but I'm going to turn off my video and start going through that briefing note as my input. So thank you very much. So let me then begin. What I thought was a useful orientation was to reflect back on what Joseph presented last week by way of a reminder on the definition of tenure. So I'll read it. A set of relationships with respect to housing and land established through statutory or customary law or informal or hybrid arrangements. And I'm going to try and come back to unpacking informal and hybrid a little later, and that it enables one to live in one's home in security, peace, and dignity. It's an integral part of the right to adequate housing and a necessary ingredient for the enjoyment of many other civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. All persons should possess a degree of security of tenure that guarantees legal protection against forced eviction, harassment, and other threats. So with that reminder of the definition from last week, what I'd like to do is add a few more concepts that I think are helpful to deepen our understanding of that definition. Firstly, tenure is complex. I think we all know that because it's about a set of relationships. It's often confused or conflated with title. So we really are concerned in this input. I'm concerned with trying to open that much wider. And I think one way of doing this is thinking about tenure as both the procedural and substantive aspects of holding land. So not just the substantive, which is the actual rights that people have, their obligations, duties, and benefits, but the procedural component is also important when we understand tenure, the processes, the procedures, and very importantly, the practices that people employ around securing their access to land and indeed managing it. My concern is if we only consider the substantive, so what rights, obligations, and benefits, we neglect other important aspects, particularly how these rights are realized, processes, who is involved in realizing these rights. And the who part is very important because we need to understand authority or power. So when it comes to tenure, authority refers to the power to enforce laws and rules. Now, I think we tend to think mostly of the law when we're talking about tenure as the source of authority. But in practice, much authority is socially derived. So the law is not the only source of authority. It's a very important one, but we need to look beyond the law to see the other sets of relationships that influence tenure, particularly social relationships. And finally, I want to introduce the concept of recognition. If we think about law, then it's quite clear that legal recognition is provided by whatever different aspects or whatever different laws or a constitution. However, there's often a huge gap between the law and people's ability to access the law. So as we know, it can be very, very far removed from people's realities. So we need to look at other aspects of recognition, such as local, and local recognition I've used to communicate the idea that the social arrangements at settlement level are often confer local recognition, and then municipal actions provide some certainty, and they also do the reverse, of course. But if they provide some certainty, we can conceptualize those those actions as administrative recognition. I'm going to come back to that, particularly with a comment on gender right at the end. I'd like to move now to the diversity of rights and the tenure continuum. So there, in practice, a wide range of rights exist, whether they're legally recognized or not. So they could be statutory, therefore legally recognized, customary, informal, or hybrid. To give you an idea of what some of these rights are, and I'm sure that you're familiar with many, if not most of them in your work, I've tried to assemble a bulleted list here, which isn't exhaustive. The important point is that naming the rights that aren't seen, that aren't visible, that aren't officially recognized, means that they have the prospect of recognition if we're able to say what they are. So some of the rights from a GLTN study that I did on a range of sub-Saharan African countries, occupation right, permission to occupy, a customary land right, group rights to land, de facto rights of possession, different forms of leasehold, individual private ownership and freehold. And then what's very important for me is that the continuum, which I've also been asked to speak about, contains perceived tenure security as a category. And based on looking through this local practice lens, it is possible to identify categories like a witnessed right to land, a locally documented right to land, a familial right to land.
Perdón, Lorin, aquí
My apologies, Lauren. This is Carla. The moderator. I'm sorry for the interruption, but we only have 1 minute left. As we mentioned, we have to, we have time elements.
Interruption in the from some of the translation, so I've stopped there. I don't know if anybody can help with that.
Hi, Lauren. It's just a warning towards the end of your time from one of our facilitators. So
oh, great.
Okay, another 2 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry.
So the important point about the land rights concept, sorry, I didn't have the right translation selected. Thank you. Clear. So the important point about the continuum of the land rights concept, I provide some background to it, but what I'd like to get to is that there's enormous debate about it. Particularly, is it promoting individual freehold ownership? What is the notion of progression? What is, however, important, in my view, about the continuum is that there's a distinction between the diversity of rights and what the continuum intended to convey. I don't think it has done this successfully because of the debate, but the concept of the continuum means that a diversity of rights are essentially recognized with the land administration backing that is required for development to flow. We can talk about that more if it comes up in questions. Finally, I'd like to make 2 comments, one about increasing access to economic opportunities, and then a final comment on gender. The problem with the focus on title is that if we only perceive title as the ultimate or the most secure form of tenure, then we limit our focus on interventions that can increase access to economic opportunity. So if we open up our understanding of tenure much wider, then beyond ownership, then we are able to consider the potential that productive use of residential land through rental or through small businesses, home-based enterprises, and livelihood activities, we then limit the potential for that kind of access to economic opportunity. So it's not simply about recognition, it's also about what recognition opens up beyond the recognition that title provides. And then finally, I want to say one thing about a gendered perspective on economic opportunity. So a range of different vulnerabilities intersect to affect access to land and housing differently. And most importantly, a couple of examples. So the requirements of individual ownership very often favor male household heads. We heard about this in the introductory session. I'm not going to go over that. Lenses of class and race will show how an increasing number of households are excluded from the mainstream system if we only recognize the formal and the legal recognition. And livelihoods can be disrupted with formalization if we don't understand, if we don't approach it with a gendered lens as well as an income lens. So in this way, we will privilege better off households or neglect a focus on women and children and the impacts of different ways of holding land for them. I hope this has given you enough of an overview of what's in the briefing paper. I suspect I've gone a little over time, but thank you very much. That's the end of my input.
Thank you very much, Lauren. We move to the second presentation from the MENA region. With us in this session is Jamal Talib, the director of the Land Research Center in Palestine. It is the center was established in 1986 in Jerusalem and in different parts of Palestine. It works on preserving the heritage and on issues of land and water and preserving the heritage in Palestine in everything that has to do with land, particularly in light of the violations that Palestinians are subjected to under Israeli occupation. Jamal Talib is also a researcher and has written many papers, including a paper about the situation of water in Palestine. It was presented as part of a book on the right to water within the Forum on Water in the Arab region. Jamal will present the different forms of violations and conflicts related to land under occupation. Of course, under the Israeli occupation, mainly the problems and the different forms having to do with tenure in Palestinian lands and for the Palestinian people under occupation. Jamal, you can start now to present your paper, and we hope that the presentation is within the available time. Thank you, Abdel Maula, for this beautiful presentation. Thank you, everyone. Hello to all those present. I would like to share my screen if it's possible. Can someone allow me
Now
to
possible for you to share your screen. Thank you, Jamal.
الكل شايف؟
We
can
can see it.
everyone
Yeah.
see? I will start by talking about the philosophy of land tenure and ownership and how this happened in history. This tree you see is the oldest tree on planet Earth. It is in Palestine. It was planted by the Canaanites in 3000 BC. This demonstrates that Palestine has been inhabited and has strong agriculture from the beginning of time. People at that time were more linked to hunting, but when they started to deal with land, then the relationship started with agriculture and land. It started first in the land in old Iraq, showing the irrigation channels. This is part of the Hammurabi, the Babylonian famous leader. Also, the Valley of the Nile civilization. This papyrus shows the distribution and the division of land, distribution of land in Egypt in the beginning of history. During that time, the king represented the god who owned the land, and the king represents God, and he is the one who grants the right to use land. And this was a monopoly for kings. There were kingdoms here and there. However, these kingdoms were strong if their land tenure, particularly agricultural land, was distributed among a large number of farmers. However, when they were monopolized by the army leaders, the kingdoms weakened gradually. Therefore, the more the tenure was expanded to the poor, the more the kingdom enjoyed riches. This was written by an Egyptian wise man called Ebur in 2000 BC on this papyrus. Over the ages, a land tenure developed. I will quickly talk about part of this development. The Hammurabi laws talked about the issue of land, that land, those who leave it for 3 years are not worthy of keeping it, and those who use it for 3 years are entitled to own it. He also said that land, farm, and the home may not be sold. They are not goods. Imagine this concept has been present since that time in history. Also, there is an article that states that land may not be left unused. It should be used in order for land to be used for production. Ancient Greeks, if you know, they had large feudal systems, and the Plato philosophy emerged against feudal system. He said that the society should be divided into 3 classes: the rulers, the combatants, the farmers. the manufacturers and the merchants. This is not a class division, but it has the intention of explaining that rulers and combatant soldiers are prohibited from owning land because they have power, and if they own land, they will exploit the people. Tenure should only be for farmers, manufacturers, and merchants. This he is a philosopher, of course, and politicians don't listen to them. With the Romans, it was a large empire in most of the old world. We all know that the Roman Empire was destroyed by Neron. But the truth is that Neron said that what destroyed the empire was the feudal system, because if they uh, followed Plato's advice, then the empire would not have collapsed. This was a quick idea about land tenure in old ages. Now, we move to the Middle East and North Africa region. We have a relationship in Arab history with tenure, the accumulated Arab experience and the Islamic civilization history in land tenure. If we talk about the Islamic era, we find that the Prophet Muhammad said that dead land is land where there is no buildings. Those who use the land have more of a right to it. So he called upon the people to use the land and reclaim land instead of fighting over the already used land. And this is a very important point. And then Umar ibn al-Khattab, the caliph, talked about those who reclaimed land for 3 years can own it. We find that Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he encouraged Muslims and Arabs to reclaim the land, he resorted to Hammurabi's laws because it's heritage in the region that complements each other. These are important points to know well. In Palestine, we move now to Palestine. After this, the Ottoman land law emerged. You know that the Ottoman state as an Islamic state continued for about 450 years. In the last 50 or 70 years, they started to work on organizing land. The idea of tenure was that the Sultan, as was the case with the kings in the old ages, is the one who had the land to the right, excuse me, to grant land to users. Lands may not be owned by anyone. Land is not a personal ownership. It's a secure tenure for every person. Everyone has the right to live on and use the land securely. But who says that I'm the one who owns the land? Who am I to own the land? The Ottoman land law was based on the idea that the Sultan is the one who grants the tenure right. They divided land into the land that is controlled by the Sultan and the private, as well as the religious endowment, the communal land, and he encouraged the use of materials. However, some legislators manipulated even the Ottoman law and added the issue of providing personal ownership to individuals, and this was the basis of controlling Palestine. It was not intended so by the Ottomans. When the British occupation arrived in Palestine after the end of the First World War, Everyone knows the problems that took place. Time, Jamal, please focus on the current situation in Palestine. The British occupation encouraged the Jewish immigration and then used the issue or the gap in the Ottoman law that those who use the land for 3 years and then 10 years can own it. This facilitated land ownership for the Jews and prevented or put obstacles in the way of Palestinians doing the same. The first law issued by the British occupation was putting the government in place of the Sultan. Any government owns the land is the occupation government, followed by the Israeli occupation government, which considered that all Palestinian land that is not planted, they say that these are state lands. They consider that state lands are owned by the government to grant to anyone they want in Palestine after the 1948 occupation. After the occupation of 78% of the Palestinian territories, the Israeli occupation authorities controlled the lands, the original owners of which were kicked out, and then they were placed in a fund called the guardian of the owners of those absent. They grant the land only to Jews and not any other community. They claim they are prepared to deal with everyone, but in reality, land is under the control of the National Jewish Fund. And this is what happened in the 1976 occupation when the rest of Palestine was occupied, and then the lands of Palestine were divided into the West Bank. It was divided into A, B lands for Palestinians as a civil administration only, and the rest of the land is military administration and complete control of the land, who allows an occupation state to impose a settlement land to register the land in its name. These issues represent a problem. When we move to the international treaties such as the Geneva Agreement or the Lahai Agreement do not allow this except for very special military reasons. However, the Israeli army controlled the land for military reasons and turned it into settlements. The end result is that the Palestinian land, most of the Palestinian land occupied in 48 went to foreign occupiers, and the West Bank currently 46% is occupied by settlers, and the Palestinians only control 36% of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. This only represents 8% of the area, a historical area of Palestine. This is what happened in Palestine in 1917 during the Balfour Declaration. In 1945, 25 years after the British protectorate, the division decision gave them 55%, and the 1948 gave them 78%, and now they own 92% and control the rest of Palestine and the rest of the Palestinian people. We say that people and states need laws. However, we need to know that the ownership of the land is not for the government or individuals. Land is not good. The concept of private ownership should be replaced by secure tenure. governments and states control public land in favor of the interests of their people, but they don't own them. Governments have to distribute secure tenure land to people, and this is the basis of sustainable development. Confiscation may not happen in favor of politicians or large owners for major projects, because capital should go to land that is not used to reclaim it. Land area in the world is 149 million kilometers. 7 billion people live only on 20% of this area. Why aren't there efforts and capacity to reclaim larger areas of land instead of fighting over small areas? If people use their intelligence, they can reclaim deserts to become green and creative. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Jamal, for this presentation.
I'm sorry.
Bien, Abdelmaula.
Afwan. Thank you.
Entonces,
Thank you very
ahora,
much, Abdemala. Now we will open the floor, just like Nadine said, for posing any questions or concerns, issues, or doubts you may have to Jamal and Lauren, and to share your thoughts with us. Since we have 15 minutes for this, I would kindly ask you to be as brief as possible so we can share the space with as many people as possible. So don't be shy. Share your thoughts with us openly in the mic.
teníamos al comienzo El Kabir, puede ser, había levantado la mano.
I believe that El Kabir had raised his hand early in the session. Would you please share your thoughts with us? And for all those people that posted their comments on the chat, you can share them with us openly in the mic.
اهلا وسهلا تحيه للجميع خاصه
Greetings to everyone, particularly the facilitators. In reality, the last intervention was good, especially that he pointed out the history of land tenure, starting from or based on the situation in Palestine. Also, I would like to point out that in Morocco, maybe there is a special situation with relation to land ownership. From early history, land tenure in Morocco and maybe in all of North Africa, land ownership was collective, meaning that land may not be owned individually and may not be sold or bought. The use of the benefits was divided justly and equally between the groups and the individuals, including men and women. This system was very old, What changed this system, first of all, was the introduction of foreign thinking that give the king or the caliph tenure of all the land. And these ideas came from Asia as a production pattern and went through the Arab Peninsula into North Africa. It's a production pattern that was established in North Africa and in Morocco. The French and Spanish occupation, as well as the Italian occupation in North Africa and Morocco, they aimed to destroy the social structure that was based on tenure and production tools represented in land. Now in Morocco, in order not to take too long, currently in Morocco, imagine that we have more than 15 million hectares. It is land that is owned by groups, not individuals, meaning about 150,000 square kilometers is owned by groups. What interests me now in sharing with you is to defend these remnants and this way of thinking and these values that render land a collective ownership and a fair and equal division of resources and wealth. If we will have another opportunity for discussion and go into details in this topic, and thank you.
Muchas gracias, El Kabir.
Thank you very much for your questions and your comments. Abdimala,
Tienes tu mano levantada, adelante.
I believe that you raised your hand.
Thank you very much, Jamal and Lauren, for this presentation from which we benefited a lot. Of course, I was hoping from Lauren to give us an idea about the forms of conflicts with relation to access to tenure in Zimbabwe. Time was very short for the presentation. Also, Jamal, with relation to the current situation about the forms of grabbing tenure in Palestine on part of the occupation forces. We hope also after this that all the participants obtain all the presentations by mail. It would be good. Thank you.
Adelante, Jamal.
Go ahead, Jamal.
Thank you very much. To start with, I know that this is a training. Time, dialogue, and interaction. From my experience, after reaching this age, I have found that many worldwide, not only in our region, in our MENA region, they do not know the chronology of land history. Who gave you ownership of this land? This is a question, a major philosophical question. So I wanted to start with this historical chronology more than focusing on the current reality. However, the current reality in Palestine, not only in Palestine, by the way, I was for 4 years the coordinator of the committee or the landless constituency group in the CFS in Rome. And therefore, the world, the population of which is 7 billion, about 2.5 billion are landless worldwide. We used to believe that the Palestinian people are the ones who became landless due to the occupation, and this is a truth and an unfair occupation. The Syrian people, 5 million due to the internal wars and aggression, and there in Iraq, there are many who are landless. The same goes for Yemen and Libya. However, the reality is that there are many other people around the world who are landless. These landless people, where do they live? Here we come the question. These people did not come from the sky. They were born and they will live on the land, as is the case with other people, and we will all be buried under the land one day. Land is larger than us. It accommodates all the rights and it is larger than all the rights. And we need to know that land is the mother of all people. It's not a commodity in the hands of people. And now we come to the Zionist or the Israeli occupation, who gave Israel the right to give ownership to new immigrants of Palestinian land that is being confiscated from Palestinians and given to the settlers. First, once through military means, sometimes using the gaps in the Ottoman law, saying this land is not arable and these are state lands. So why do you give them to an immigrant? Why don't you give them to the owner of the land that who use it? And what does it mean to use the land? This philosophy and these concepts should be talked about because these are the essence of land ownership. The world should know that occupiers and colonizers think of the right to land as something they own and they absorb all its good, while the real historic owner of the land says, I have an obligation towards this land, and I am taking this concept from the colleague Joseph. He's the first who talked about this. We say that we should serve the land. We serve the land in order to feed people. However, the occupier says, I use and exploit the land because it is my right. This is a major philosophic difference that we should realize. Any occupation the world needs to know will continue to exploit the land, contaminate the soil and the plants, and increase the climate change. Where are the billions that the United Nations and countries allocate to serve the poor in order to develop agriculture and improve levels of oxygen and reduce emissions and reduce pollution? Where do they go? They go to the owners of capital, monopolizing countries, and they do not go to the poor except very little. In such groups, we need to talk about these things. We talk about the human right to land and to housing and to clean environment, to clean water. These rights, these are the rights that we need to preserve. I know that you are not a political group, Abdel Maula. In order to talk about politics alone, I also would like to talk about human beings as human beings, how they lead on this uh, earth. And Palestine is only a model, but there are oppressed people everywhere from Latin America until Philippines and Southeast Asia. There are poor people all around the world and people deprived of land. We need to struggle and raise their voices in order to obtain their right to life because they are the sons and daughters of this land and they don't own it. Thank you.
Gracias, Jamal. Tenemos
Thank you, Jamal. I have Loom Dweller who's raising their hands. We only have 5 minutes.
Adelante.
Go ahead. Slum Dwellers, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the HIV. Can you hear me? Can you hear
Perfectamente.
me?
Te pedimos que seas breve.
Yes, please try to be quick.
Yeah. First, thank you for the HIC International Coalition for the arrange good meeting that will be for the land right and city and house. We have a survey last few days. We're finding some documents from here. Maybe next meeting we can say something.
Sorry, Slum Dwellers, this is the interpreter speaking. We cannot hear you clearly.
45 million cases in Bangladesh.
Sorry, Slum Dwellers, sorry. The interpreters cannot hear your audio and therefore we cannot interpret the sound or what you're saying. So it's going to be very difficult. Could you please write something in the chat?
Now clear? Okay. Now clear? Now clear?
It
Okay,
sounds a little bit better.
Now it's clear?
Escucha bien. Te pedimos que escribas algo en el chat y lo
Yes, we
retomamos.
cannot hear you well. We would like to ask you to maybe write your thoughts in the chat and then maybe we can go back to it. I'm afraid we cannot hear.
One minute, I stand up. 1 minute.
Vamos a seguir adelante.
Let's move on. If you could please, Slum Dwellers, write your thoughts in the chat. So let's continue. So before moving to our next presentation, maybe Ding wants to share some thoughts. And we want to ask the rest who raised your hands, please take note of your questions for the next session.
I'm not sure that I heard correctly. Is there now an opportunity to provide a comment from presenters? Or are we moving into the next session?
Yes, Lauren, we have a few more minutes. If you'd like to give a comment, that would be great.
I would love to. Thank you. The first comment I wanted to make was, I think the historical dimension that was presented so well with reference to Palestine is really important. And in responding to the question about, I'm going to make it, the question was Zimbabwe, but I can speak from a South Africa perspective. And I think history here is really important, as people would know, because what we're dealing with now is the legacy of dispossession, both colonial and apartheid dispossession. So the question was about conflicts. In an urban environment, the main conflicts take place in a juridical sense in the courts. They're political conflicts around land. And then they're very local, internal to a settlement context where, for example, leadership may be a kind of gatekeeper in terms of who's allowed access to a settlement that's informally established or occupied. And then furthermore, at the household scale, where conflicts can occur, where particular household members, more vulnerable household members, particularly women and children, might lose access to property. So that's a very brief overview of the sorts of conflicts that are present currently, but it does need to be seen in historical context. And just my concluding point is that most people in South Africa, 60% of people, their relationship to land is outside of the formal property system. So the property ownership problem, we've called it an edifice. It's massive, it's hard to shift, and it's very exclusionary. And many of our conflicts are about people who settle on land because there are no other options available. Either the state isn't delivering or the market excludes them. So they're outside of the formal system and therefore subject to the threat of eviction. We have a system, a legal system that is protective of people in this situation, but you have to be able to access legal representation to truly protect yourself. So the conflicts are systemic with their roots in history. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Lorin.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Now, let us present from Latin America, Tatiana Alfonso Sierra. She is a full-time professor of the Department of Right of ITAM. She's a psychologist and lawyer of the University of Los Andes in Bogota, Colombia. She has a master's in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She develops research on human rights, sociology, studies of race, ethnicity, and research methods. Tatiana is exploring the relationship between rights and social inequalities in projects on racial discrimination and human rights, social movements, and legal changes, rights to property on the land of indigenous people, Black communities in Latin America. She has published a lot of writings. One of these topics are property in Colombia and issues in distribution, judicial reform of Colombia as well. Tatiana, go ahead, please. Thank you very much, Carla, and thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for HIC for letting me be here in this co-learning space. I will share a slide. I'll try to limit myself to my 10 minutes. Thank you very much. So, first of all, I would like to present an analysis that's part of a research project that's much greater, where we've been analyzing different forms of claims on the land and how different regimes of lands or property on the land have been overlapping in different contexts. It's not just Latin American cases, but also from other parts. But the case that I'm currently working is is the case of Colombia, of course. And in this project, essentially what we try to analyze is how this plurality of regimes on the land works. And unlike what was mentioned by Lauren, for the case of Colombia specifically, we haven't conceptualized it as a continuum, but rather a fragmentation. And now I'm going to show a specific case because, well, first, the fundamental question is how this plurality of regimes on lands and territory allows for one of the territory rights or human rights to land is ensured or guaranteed, or to see what are the threats these local communities face because of this imposition of judicial regimes. And the second question is how communities, local communities, move around this recognition to generate better results in terms of access to other types of systems and in terms of social conflicts. So for this, the case in Colombia is a case that presents, well, Colombia say it's the only Latin American country that in formal terms at least has an internal armed conflict, which is legally recognized. It's an internal conflict that's been around for over a century. We have different waves of violence, but all approaches agree that the fight over land is in the heart of this armed conflict in Colombia. So as a consequence, and of course not a coincidence, this has implied different ways of tenure, formality, legality, and fights over land and territory. So in general terms, I think you can see the slide here. You could say that as a context, in Colombia, 84.7% of municipalities are considered rural. 30% of the population still live in rural areas, despite the fact that Colombia has had one of the worst eviction cases in the world. And this has caused, in terms of land tenure, there have been high levels of informality and lack of organization also. Now, in terms of recognition and regimes, one can identify, trying to organize the whole Colombian territorial conflict as well as the different levels of organization. And here we have the rural rate, but what's in dark green, these are the most rural areas of the country. So it's not less in terms of proportion or population. However, as Jamal mentioned, there are many people whose rights to land is not guaranteed, and the tenure of the land is highly threatened. And it's very important to mention how the historical trajectories that explain these land regimes in Colombia, where we have this armed conflict, which is mostly pertaining territorial conflict. There's a lot of lack of organization and formality. And with time, Colombia, as a state or nation, has generated different levels of regimes on land, which has generated the claims of local communities and the threats of other actors who are fighting over the tenure of the land
Tatiana,
to get mixed up.
apologies. I've just been asked by some of the interpreters if you could slow down a little bit to allow for easier interpretation. My apologies for interrupting you.
Sure, you're right. Perdón. Es como que yo usualmente.
Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. I got a little too excited, but anyway. Well, you can identify different threats with regards to these land regimes and also different frameworks that people use to defend their right to land, and also different procedural places where these mobilization of social processes take place. In terms or more schematic terms on the property land, which are formal, what's interesting and challenging in the case of Colombia is that local communities are moving around this. We have at least 3 types of regimes that have different moments of resurgence, different political processes also, and different property settings, which is the term we've been using, that are also different. So first of all, we have the regime that has to do with formalizing land, which has to do with a failed farming reform in the 60s in Colombia, and also a legal reform in the 90s, which was liberal, where the nation intended with a discourse to make the land productive, and they intended to distribute the land to individuals. And by distributing and formalizing, and in that case, the identity, the political and social identity in which this reform was made was with the farm workers' identity, of course, thinking about the individuality of land ownership. And this is a legal reform of the 90s, which was a total failure when it came to implementing it. And as the armed conflict grew, the state grew weaker in some regions to repress and to guarantee rights, of course. So all of the allocation and formalization processes for field workers in many places simply didn't take place in Colombia. When you look at the map, that's basically what happened. Then, actually around the same time in 1991, with the new constitution, Colombia acknowledged or made a multicultural reform like in many Latin American countries, and it acknowledges ethnic groups as ethnic groups, indigenous communities and Black communities. And By acknowledging them as part of the nation, they acknowledge specific rights, specifically the right to the land. And it does so in this figure that has been mentioned today, which is through collective property. It's called collective property, and in theory, it intends to acknowledge the ancestral occupation and the collective organizations of indigenous peoples and Black communities. And then in 2011, Colombia got a new regime of restitution, which intends to repair territorial losses of those people and communities that were displaced during the internal armed conflict over the last 20 years. Now, within all of this regime of collective property, which is the case, I will illustrate in the next couple of minutes. Colombia tried, in theory, or in theory, acknowledge collective property to recognize the forms of collective work of indigenous peoples and Black communities to fight off discrimination against these ethnic groups. Now, collective property, Colombia perhaps has the most protective dimensions against displacement in Latin America for several reasons. It has the characteristics of what a person mentioned earlier, which is that collective property of indigenous peoples and Black communities is undividable and cannot be taken away, it cannot be rented out, it cannot be sold. And in theory, that is a protection against the market, right? In terms of design, of course. Indeed, this happens if the question is if the idea of collective property that modifies the idea of territory of ethnic groups. And on the other hand, indeed, if it indeed works to protect them against displacement. So for this, we have a database from different territorial conflicts in Colombia, but this is a case in which we dive into detail. And here in the map, so this is the part in red. This is where we have this conflict taking place, and this is like a zoom in of this area. And what we see in yellow is, or these are actually territories that are protected. I'm sorry, I'm almost out of time. But these places are being protected environmentally speaking. What's in pink is collective property of indigenous peoples, and the red dots are claims of collective property for Black communities. So when you look at the map, what you see is how the different regimes overlap, which has several important implications in this case. First of all, in subnational terms, the collective property would seem to be the most protective one and has allowed it specifically to Black communities whose organizational processes are more recent than those of indigenous peoples to set up processes of social action to defend territory, which have been very important, but also recognizing collective property has also triggered in Colombia since the 90s an increase in violence against ethnic groups. So we've had on one end formally an institution of property that is safe, but that has also caused more social conflicts because the disposition of legal and illegal disposition is increased for armed sectors. And also, both are very solid processes, but where title has been essential or fundamental. This is the case of a Black community that has a collective title that's been recognized by the state, and another one that does not have a collective title fighting a mining project. The community with this title has been able to halt the mining project through many different legal strategies, which has also presented an increased or solidification in their process, which has been, of course, quite interesting. Now, also at the same time, the title has caused greater violence from armed sectors against this community and more friction between the Black community and indigenous people. So this overlap of regimes shows us that there's a possibility collective property, I mean, but as long as it translates into territory, because And with this, I'm going to conclude for those communities who have organized to get this collective title. This has allowed them to reconfirm the free idea of determination on their territories. And this free idea of their territories has allowed also for the concept of property, which is reduced in terms of or in legal terms, could be expanded to the ancestral use and community use of the territory, and in particular of the natural resources. Now, they don't always win, but the social and political process is in motion, so to speak. Now I'm out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tatiana.
Yeah, Hillary, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tatiana, for that very informing and quite informative presentation. Sorry, we now cross over to back to Africa, to Uganda. I would like to now introduce to you Mrs. Dorothy Waziwe. She's the Director of Shelter and Settlements Alternative Uganda Human Settlement Network. Dorothy is a social worker by profession and has been in the human settlement sector in Uganda since 2012. In this sector, Dorothy has engaged in various activities, including fundraising for housing projects, demonstrating housing development, advocacy and lobby for responsive policies and programs, networking and collaboration with both state and non-state actors, as well as research and information sharing. Prior to the human settlements sector, Dorothy worked in different sectors such as water, sanitation and hygiene, public health and social work, HIV and AIDS awareness and banking, all aimed at improved service delivery for vulnerable households in Uganda. So Dorothy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hillary. Good day to you all. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Dorothy. Please go ahead.
Wonderful. Okay, so am I sharing my screen or is someone else sharing the screen?
Dorothy, it's up to you. I have shared your presentation already, but if you would like to share, you have permission. What would you prefer?
Okay, I think I would prefer to share it myself.
Okay.
Okay, I hope it's clear enough. So I think we've heard a lot about the different land contexts, and Africa is no different. The case of Uganda is really the same as the different presenters have shared. So I will not repeat what I have already heard. I will just try to focus on the different things in Uganda. So in terms of Uganda, according to our constitution, land belongs to the people, belongs to the citizens of Uganda. And it can be held under 4 tenure systems, which is the freehold, the leasehold, the customary, which is the communal, like other people have shared. And then we have a special tenure system, which is the Milo tenure system. This is a customary kind of tenure, which was put in place after colonialism, where large pieces of land were left in the custodianship of kingdoms, clan leaders, and the authorities. This was mainly in central Uganda as well as Western Uganda. This is similar to Morocco and other stories that we've had. In Uganda, our land policies are very elaborate, very detailed. However, given the land policy that is in place and the declarations from the Constitution, you find that we have inconsistencies and contradictions where the Land Act may say that people have the liberty to transact around land, but the Succession Act requires that for a person to sell his land or her land, they have to get the consent of their spouse. And yet resettlement action plans also have their own statements. So you find that these inconsistencies give birth to conflicts, as well as people tend to rely on those the laws that work for them and leave out the others. So you find cases of land grabbing, cases of violent evictions happening. We also have a challenge of the procedures on evictions and resettlement, that we do not have an actual declaration as a country on how resettlement is supposed to be done, or on the procedures of eviction, what happens after people have been moved from one place to another. We have laws that declare violent evictions as a violation of people's human rights, but what happens after that is normally left to the hands of the court or the police or any other party that is responsible for the action that has taken place. We have limited documentation of land in Uganda. The ministerial policy statement of 2021-2022 financial year shows that only 21% of Uganda's land is documented formally in the computerized information system. So you find that this is mainly urban land, and it leaves out the customary and the rural land. So there are a lot of conflicts that are arising in the rural areas because of land grabbing, because of commodification of land, because of speculation that this area will urbanize quickly. So you find that people are taking up rural land and displacing people, and they have no option but to come to the urban areas where they are normally confined to slums and such unsafe places. As SSA, we've been working in partnership with Housing and Land Rights Network of Habitat International Coalition, and this has been to assess the impact of dispossession of women's land and home. So this introduced the violation impact assessment tool that Joseph has talked about earlier, and in the previous session I had it also. But we were able to look at 3 cases of dispossession of women from their land and home, and I would like to tell you about these 3 cases. The first case we have is
Sorry, apologies, but your slides aren't moving forward, so we're still on your first slide.
Oh. Sorry about that. Has it moved now?
Yeah, we see fishing communities now.
Okay. And now? I hope it's moving now.
It's still on fishing communities.
Oh dear.
But you can just scroll through in this view, just select the slide that you're talking on and we can see it fine in this view like it is now.
Okay, it's the slide on the fishing communities.
Yeah, now you've selected that one and you can just select as you go through. We'll be able to see it.
Okay. So the first case that we used the violation impact assessment tool was a fishing community that is settled in Chigungu in Entebbe. Entebbe is where Uganda has an international airport. So this, the case of Makusa and Ramunyu fishing community was that they were displaced from the islands where they were doing their fishing and living. And this was the reason that they were given for this displacement was the disaster where they were experiencing flooding, but also security reasons, where the military army informed them that they were a security risk because they were near the international airport and near the State House of Uganda. So under this, the issues that we were able to document, first and foremost, was the property rights. This community was displaced from one place and they settled near the shore of Lake Victoria again. But this is a place that is an environmental risk. However, it is not under the ownership of the municipal council, which is the government, but it has a private owner who is actually getting rent from these communities and not providing services to them. Then the state, in terms of this community, does not recognize them because they say they are illegally there, and so they cannot provide them with services. But our analysis was, if they are illegally there, then the state has the mandate, has the responsibility to make sure that it resettles them, because these are people who are displaced from their homes onto the mainland, and then they do not have anywhere else to go. In terms of social inclusion, these communities have been excluded from community participation. They are not able to vote. They are not able to actually represent themselves. So as a result of this, there's a high rate of crime within their area. There's a lot of theft, and there's also violence against women and girls. Then lastly, in terms of their economic status, since they were posing a security risk for the army, they are not allowed to continue with their fishing, which is their livelihood source. So they are stranded on the mainland, but not able to fish. They're not able to earn a living. They're not able to maintain their livelihoods. So in terms of redress, there has been charity assistance, relief, and humanitarian assistance, but also we are pushing for the local government to be able to resettle them and relocate them to a place where they are safe and they have security of tenure. The second case, is it clear on the screen? Is cases of dispossession of women from land and home.
Dorothy, we're still on fishing communities.
Is it now changed?
Just scroll down.
I'm scrolling. I don't know.
Oh.
So the case is about the different Amuru district in northern Uganda, where women have been dispossessed of their land and home due to customary practices and beliefs. So in this case, we were able to document that the issues that are existing. Has it changed now? Okay, that is better. So in the customary practices, women in Uganda in most of the areas do not own land, or they do not inherit land. The only way that they're able to own land is if they purchase it. So women have been dispossessed of their land due to that lost or unequal inheritance. Then as a result of violent evictions from the family, as a result of the war in northern Uganda, most of the families were displaced from their land and kept in camps. And when they returned home, they had lost their land, and any attempt to reclaim it led to violent evictions. Then we also have cases of gender-based violence where there is wife inheritance. Once a person's spouse passes away, then the siblings or the relatives inherit the wife. And if she is not willing, she is practically forced into that marriage. And there are rituals also that are conducted to cleanse the person, the widow, from the sins of the past, because they believe that the reason why her husband has died is because she did something like witchcraft. We also documented cases of livelihood loss, because in northern Uganda, the women are the producers. They are the producers, they are the ones who till the land for agriculture. So after they've tilled the land, the partner takes the proceeds that come out of the produce that they have come up with. And also there were cases where the partner sells the land without the consent or the communication, or without communicating to to the lady. We also saw that there was...
Dorothy, discúlpame por interrumpirte,
Dorothy,
pero
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you would have 2 minutes left because we're running out of time.
Okay, I'm almost done.
muchas disculpas porque es fascinante.
Okay.
I'm so very sorry.
No, it's okay. So in terms of redress, we've had sensitization when working with the customary systems where we approach the traditional leaders and we have negotiations and discussions with them to be able to allow women to inherit land. There have also been court cases that have been supported by a paralegal project and a legal aid project that is actually under the courts of law. There have been community meetings to provide alternative justice systems so that women are able to claim their lost property and also able to defend themselves. The last case will not be, I won't be able to go into it, but it's a development-induced displacement where the main issues have been about the discoordination of state agencies, the uncertainty of communities, especially women, to the displacement that is coming up as a result of this project, and the gap that exists in the state being able to defend the eviction processes or the procedures where they're supposed to give free and prior informed consent from the community so that they can take over the land, and yet there's no participation in this particular project. So the communities are just being told that they're going to be displaced. Those are the few examples that I could bring from Uganda, and I thank you for listening to me.
شكرا جزيلا دورسي من أوغندا.
Thank you very much to Dorothy from Uganda about this presentation about land rights and conflicts, particularly the 3 examples and cases that she presented. Tatiana from Colombia also thank you about the problems having to do with ethnic groups in Colombia and other places. The problems having to do with access to land. We open the discussion now for about 12 minutes, a maximum of 12 minutes. If anyone would like to raise their hands in order to take the floor. Mr. Sami Nagar had commented more than once why during Tatiana's presentation and Dorothy's presentation, if there is any contribution, go ahead, and any other, go ahead, Mr. Sami. Peace be upon you all. Thank you for hosting us on this platform that addresses the rights of land and housing. Everything that was presented was perfect. In Yemen, we suffer from the inability of minorities to access land tenure. The law in general says that everyone has the right, but however, due to customs, minorities, particularly Black minorities, are deprived of land ownership. In the South, there was a generalization during the Socialist Party that all land is affiliated to the state, and the state can distribute it equally as it sees fit. In the northern areas, there is deprivation of land ownership on part of Black and marginalized minorities in Yemen because they, according to the those who believe in this, are not among the indigenous people, and they are minorities that recently moved to Yemen. We find real difficulty that there are racist practices against Black citizens as if it is only restricted to special categories, and this escalated during the conflict. I liked when Tatiana talked about their experience in Colombia. It was excellent. I thank also Mr. Gamal and all those presented. It was beneficial. I hope that there are practical steps on how to find solutions or of solutions on how to obtain land tenure, particularly for minorities, well, groups. This is what I want to add to the discussion, and I apologize if I've taken too long. Thank you very much, Mr. Sami. There is Aileen who had raised her hand. Excuse me, Hillary. Aileen, will you?
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Well, I just have a very specific question for all the speakers that presented today. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for giving us such interesting talks. However, I still wonder what the best way will be to protect land so that women can have a sustainable access and legal certainty in access to land. And that women no longer endure cases such as those presented today, and women are no longer affected by land displacements. And another question that is directly addressed to Tatiana is, do you have any information about the collective property regime allowing women to gain more protection concerning access to land and natural resources? Are there any other resources that you can talk about and share with the group? Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا إلين، شكرا جزيلا. هل هناك مشارك آخر؟ هيلاري كنت رافع إيدك. هيلاري.
Are there other participants? Hillary, any other participants, or Hillary, you had raised your hand. Jamal,
Okay.
have you raised your hand?
Maybe Jamal first and then I'll go. After the presenters.
Okay. اوكي يا جمال، اتفضل يا جمال لو انت عندك. هل في حد اخر مشارك؟ جمال.
انا بصراحه بس بدي
To
اعلق
be honest, I would just like to comment on what Ellen said about collective ownership, that it protects women more or provides more protection. In my opinion, collective ownership or individual ownership does not protect women if there is a culture, a strong gender culture, unless there is a desire on part of the women to work on the land, and the rest of the community and the men are convinced that this is a right of the women. Means of manipulation are used in all cases unless the culture exists. This is what I just wanted to say. Thank you, Jamal. Hillary.
Thank you, Abdomala. And then I just want to go in just a bit in terms of we have heard of the various continuums, the various tenure systems, which are there from the informal to the assumed to the freehold tenure holding systems. And then going on forward to the last question, which was just asked on how then do we make sure that these violations don't continue to happen, which we saw that majority of them target women and children, as they are the majority of those who are usually at the habitat or at home or at the piece of land. So I think I would like to direct our participants to general comment number 26 under the UN Cultural, Economic and Social Rights Committee, which is actually lobbying for a standalone human right to land, which as all of us can help by supporting in our different countries, in our different organizations, in making sure that general comment number 26 becomes a reality, which we see basically as the foundation to the human right to land. We should make sure that, or try to reduce the violations against habitat and land rights. So I think basically that is just briefly my contribution on that.
شكرا هيلاري. هل ممكن تاتيانا ودورسي مباشرة؟
Thank you, Hillary, Tatiana, and Dorothy. Directly in 2 minutes, if they have any comments about these questions that were posed, Dorothy or Tatiana. 1 minute each, excuse me, because time is very short.
Okay, so in 1 minute, for the question asked by Aline, at least in Colombia, collective property rights are guaranteed by the collective subject. So like Jamal said, the gender relationships in the community govern these aspects. So luckily or unluckily, in the formalization of individual property, the reforms or modifications in the legal framework consider women to be priority owners versus men, and that tries to change the pattern of tenure in terms of gender. It's not the solution, but at least we're making baby steps on that. For ethnics, due to the armed conflict, the great majority of the processes of territorial defense are led by women. Why? Because men are more often killed than women. Women are the target of gender violence.
أقل من دقيقة دورسي. Hello?
Dorothy? Yes, please. Sorry, I missed the translation. In response to that, in Uganda, we have started what we call the Women Land Rights Movement that is following the General Comment 26 that Hillary talked about. This is a social movement that is bringing together different actors, especially those from the state, those from the traditional and customary leadership, as well as the men who are coming on board as gender champions. So we are bringing together this social movement so that we can cause for action around women's property rights, women's land and housing rights. And so far we've started to see more registration of titles in the names of women, more family registered land titles. And we think that this is a movement that is actually going to cause a lot of change in Uganda. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا دورسي. Okay, Hillary.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. Hillary.
I think we're going to Heather now to close the session. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Abdalmala, and thank you, everyone. This has been such a rich session with examples from everywhere around the world, and we also saw a lot of similarities in the cases. So this is really important to identify as part of our collective struggle to move forward in making changes. And so in this respect, we ask a question for you to answer in the Google Classroom for the next session. So that question is, given what you have heard during this co-learning space, do you have any experiences to share which show the differences or similarities with other regions? So if anything inspired you that you thought, oh, this happens where I live as well, please go to the Google Classroom and add your comments there. And in the next session next week, which will be held on May 25th, that session will focus on sharing strategies and instruments, including innovative and alternative mechanisms for land governance and secure tenure to strengthen our struggles to realize the right to land. And I heard many people talking about the general comment on land, general comment 26, which Housing and Land Rights Network of HIC is also very active in. And in session 4, we will have another speaker who is very active in that as well. So this will also be a theme, part of the advocacy going forward that we can discuss more. And before we close, we also have an opportunity for everyone here to share feedback with us on how these sessions are going, what you think, any changes. I believe the link has been posted in the chat. So if you scroll to where you see Learning Officer has posted, there is a link there, and it will also be sent to everyone in an email. So that link will be sent and you can just fill the form with your comments. I think that is all for today, unless there's anything from you, Nadine, to end with.
No, just to say thank you to all of our speakers, to Dorothy, Tatiana, Damal, and Lauren. Thank you so much for joining us despite power cuts and last minute changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Bye.
Bye, Dorothy. Bye.
Thank you and bye everyone. Gracias, merci, shukran.
إلى اللقاء. Thank you so much. Thank you for all.
شكرا يا عبد المولى، شكرا استاذ جمال.
شكرا يا ابو حميد،
كنتم رائعين الحقيقه.
لا والله ده موضوع مرهق.
لا بس برافو عليكم بصراحه.
لا والله بجد موضوع، لا بجد شكرا جزيلا لكم جميعا فعلا. Thank you for all, نادين, Heather, Carla, Hillary, and all participants in this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's just stay behind as the coordinating team, the facilitator team, just to have a quick conversation and then.
أنا أغلقت التسجيل يا نادين.
Abdul Maula, close the recording or ended the recording. Is that
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you, Abdul Maula.